Okay, well, I guess it's time for us to start off. Steve, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, okay. So I'd just like to say it's really nice to see. I've had a look at the participants, and there's a fair few names: Marcin, Andre, and Stephen that I've been working with in the past. So it's really great to have you guys on the meeting. So just to introduce, my name's Steve Salisbury. For those of you who haven't met me. Sorry, I should share a screen so you can see my ugly mug. So I'm a product marketing specialist for Runecast. Some of you I've met in the past when I was a solution engineer for Runecast, and some of you I'm still working with today, which is great. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by our CTO, Markus Strauss. So Markus, would you like to introduce yourself?
I will indeed. Thank you very much. I do have to correct you though. I'm not our CTO. Ireland would be very happy about that. But you know,
I've got a typo there.
that's
So,
all right.
sorry, our CPO.
Yeah,
I'm
that's okay.
sorry, Eileen, if you're listening.
That's okay. No problem. So yeah, my name is Markus Strauss. I'm the Chief Product Officer. So meaning I'll look after everything that's in relation to product, whether that's road mapping, our planning, UX, things of that nature. And of course, also, like to spend as much time as possible with our customers to get feedback on the things that we're planning and the things that we're building. So I'm really, really happy to be here today and to talk you through, together with Steve, a little bit about our SaaS offering and about the recent changes and the additions to some of the vulnerability assessment capabilities that we've introduced in Runecast. So yes, really looking forward to this session.
So, I mean, having just introduced that, Markus, talking about, that we've got Runecast SaaS and Agentless, I think, the big question here at the moment is, why is the release of Runecast SaaS so important? So why is SaaS important to organizations? And which types of organizations can really benefit from Runecast SaaS?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I think for Runecast, it signifies another step into basically being where our customers want us to be, right? Meaning we've, of course, had our traditional OVA-based deployment method that we've had for many years. We've also, of course, added over time the ability to deploy through Kubernetes as a Helm deployment, and of course, then as time went on, we added the ability to deploy through some of the hyperscaler marketplaces like AWS Marketplace, Azure Marketplace. But of course, in that case, it was a deployment that you still, as the customer, needed to manage and own the infrastructure, and it was bring your own license basically in that sense. So now with adding SaaS as an additional deployment option, it just means that we can round out our deployment capabilities in terms of, if you're a customer who is either in the process of moving software into more of a SaaS setup, which we've seen quite a lot over the recent years, with many customers who have spoken to us about the fact that they really don't necessarily want or need to be able to manage the actual infrastructure on which Runecast runs. That's, of course, SaaS is there to help alleviate that. And also for the more cloud native deployments where we see customers starting to migrate workloads, obviously, into AWS and into other hyperscalers, and the ability to monitor, of course, inside that cloud environment natively with a SaaS solution makes a lot of sense there as well. And I also see we've already gotten 2 questions, which is great. And I'm going to pick both of these right now. Well, I'm going to pick the first one right now and the next one as we go through. And the question is around whether we have separate pricing for the SaaS offering. And the answer to that is quite simple. No, it's the same pricing. It's the same licensing. It's basically a relatively fungible way of moving the licenses between the different deployment methods, simply because of the fact that we generally don't license the install itself, as in the appliance itself. We license the workloads that you monitor, whether that's CPUs on the VMware side, or whether that's billable assets in any of the other deployments or any of the other tech stacks that we monitor. So therefore, it doesn't really matter whether you deploy on premises or whether you deploy as SaaS or whether you deploy through a Kubernetes deployments. And therefore, by extension, we kept the license the same as well to make sure that nothing changes from a licensing and from a pricing perspective. So wanted to grab that one already at the beginning. There's a second question that I will get to a little bit later on.
So I think that's like a really nice overview of like why SaaS is important for organizations. I think maybe, Markus, can we expand on that just slightly about, so what happens if I'm a big organization and I want to use Runecast SaaS globally? How can I separate things out? Is that possible? What can we achieve there?
Yeah, of course. I mean, and maybe now is a good time for me to actually switch over, and we'll go through and actually look at what it looks like when I, as a customer, request a SaaS deployment, and just go a little bit through that process, because I think a lot of these questions are much easier to answer when we actually look at the interface rather than a slide deck. So give me 1 second. I will bring up the next screen and we can look at that. Meanwhile, I'm going to actually take that second question, and that was about whether we have plans to add DORA or NIS2, and the answer is both, with a resounding yes. There is still questions over when, and of course, these are kind of forward-looking things, so I'm always a little bit careful with what I share. But DORA will be much sooner than potentially expected, and NIS2 will follow pretty soon after that. The general flow for requesting SaaS is the same as it is for any other type of deployment, right? So if you are either an existing customer or a new customer that gets in touch with us, and you normally would want to request a free trial or a trial, right? And usually that cumulates into the fact that you will be setting up a account on the portal, right? So that's what we see here. Of course, I'm not going to register. I've already registered before. So usually what that means is you'll be logging into your portal account and, by extension, getting access to the different deployment methods that Runecast offers. Of course, with the exception of the marketplace-based offerings, because of course these are not hosted by us or in our portal. Existing customers will recognize this immediately, because that's where you normally look for your licensing information, your OVA and things like that. But you can also see here at the top, and we will be moving some of these menu items around soon as well. But you can see here at the top, you have try Runecast SaaS, right? And really what it does, it starts the initial request process. And right now you'll see only 2 regions here. So here's a little asterisk on the regions. If you are in a region outside of EU Central or US East, which is quite likely, and you do require a SaaS instance within your region for data residency reasons, do let us know. We've purposely not listed every region right now at the beginning, because of course we're just at the very beginning of having a SaaS offering. So we do want to make sure that we're mindful of the cost as well as the sprawl of that for ourselves. So if you are in a region that's outside of EU Central or US East, do let us know, and we will make sure that the region is available. But that basically is already part of the making sure that you can set up and run your SaaS environment in a region that's close to you for data residency reasons, right? So if you are using Runecast for compliance, vulnerability assessment, things like that, where data residency really is important, then you here would want to make sure that you can pick a region that's within your data residency or data sovereignty area, right? So I would then go through this, and this is it, right? I've requested SaaS now. Now, currently, the process takes anything from an hour to a business day. That depends a little bit on, of course, whether you're an existing customer or a brand new customer, because of course we do want to make sure that we have all of the details, all of the data, and everything is checked and validated to make sure that what we then deploy really is for you as the customer or the prospect. And there are some manual steps involved where usually we will make sure that we have the right person, and the account is basically relevant in terms of it's a real account and it's a real request. And then you will get an email which then will basically provide you with the details of where your login is and what it looks like and things like that. And I can share that. So what you will get is basically a login URL that looks something similar to this, right? Of course, this one is my one, so it's my name and some lettering, and it ends with runecast.cloud, right? So that's your outside facing login. It's going to be the exact same process or the exact same login, the way you're used to from logging in locally to your Runecast appliance, just that in this particular case, it's not a local appliance. It's deployed within our AWS environment. So you will basically get your initial user with an initial password that, of course, you really please need to change, right? Once you get it, because it's an initial password that's not meant to be used permanently, right? And then from then on out, it's, as you can see, for anyone who's on the call who's had experience with setting up Runecast before, it follows the exact same process as you would normally have. So let me try and actually set it up while we're on the call. As much as I like here's one that I've prepared earlier, I thought I'll go through this actually on the call itself and see. In this case, I'm going to use the access key for that. And at this point now we're greeted with a next step, and that also brings me nicely into the second part of today's topic, which is the agentless vulnerability scanning, because this is a step that's slightly different now, that's expanded to what it used to look like when you went and set up a AWS account or an AWS environment that you wanted to analyze with Runecast. We've added additional steps in here to, of course, allow for the agentless monitoring, right? So you will see here that there's many different regions that you could choose, right, for, and it also guides you through the process to basically set up the resource in that selected region to make sure that the resource is set up correctly. We're using CloudFormation for that, and to be able then to connect to the EC2 instances inside that particular region. Again, making sure that the actual workload that is used to do the agentless scanning is within your region, right? So that's why you'll be able to choose all of the different regions here, and that is to ensure that the scanning will stay within your region, right? So let's assume if you're based out of Frankfurt or out of Germany, right? You can use Frankfurt. If your workloads are running in Frankfurt, I would suggest you use Frankfurt. I would always suggest you use the region where your EC2 instances are running in, to keep all of that data within that region. And like I said, you can then either create a new CloudFormation stack or update an existing one, and you can continue from here. I can then, of course, as always, start using the initial wizard to select the profiles that I would want to start out with. So in this particular case, let's just do CIS, and we'll do some NIST, and we continue. And yeah, we'll also enable the automated scheduler, and we hit analyze now. So of course, this will take a while, and there's only one system connected, so it might not generate a huge amount of data. But the point being here is to just showcase that the entire flow and the entire look and feel and what you see and what you experience when you work with Runecast is exactly the same, right? There's no changes between the what you would call the on-premises version or the SaaS version, and that's because that is the same code base. It's the same product, it's the same look and feel, it's the same workflows that are available in any of the other deployment methods as well. So from a day-to-day working with Runecast, nothing has changed with having an additional SaaS deployment option, basically, right? So let me see if I can get any detected issues yet. Yes, we do. There we go. So here we've got exactly the same overview that we had before, right? We've got our dashboards, we've got our issues. Nothing has changed there. The only difference now is, of course, now I've got a login that goes to runecast.cloud, which is my SaaS login, and that allows me to navigate through Runecast the same way as I would have been used to if I would have deployed it either on-prem or through any of the hyperscaler marketplaces and deployed it there. And to go to your point back, Steve, around the how can we deal with multiple different regions or multiple different groups or locations? Again, not much has changed in the sense of what we can do. We already introduced organizations a while back. I want to say towards the second half of last year at this point. It's been quite some time. And of course, we can use organizations for that, right? So we could easily start looking at setting up organizations the same way as we would have done earlier, right? I could go and create an organization, work with that, or what I could also do is, for example, if I would have geographically disconnected environments where it would make sense, for example, to have a different deployment. For example, let's say on-premises to SaaS, right? It's a good example because, of course, the SaaS offering itself, while you can monitor, for example, operating systems that are on-premises, it's certainly possible. It might not be always the most performant way of doing it because, of course, you always have traffic going back and forth. But for example, monitoring a VMware environment on premises from SaaS is currently not possible, not at least not recommended, right? I mean, there's certainly ways to potentially do that, but not officially supported, not something that I would recommend, just simply because of the fact that you would have to start opening ports and basically make both systems accessible to the outside world, which is never a good idea. So currently from SaaS into on-premises VMware, that's non-supported monitoring. Basically, we can't really do that, or we really don't support this setup. In this particular case, then it makes sense to basically connect another Runecast instance to our SaaS instance, for example, right? And we can do that through the exact same way as we did before with the enterprise console, right? We can activate these here, and I gotta see. Hopefully I can add an enterprise console here in this system. So we'll have to look at that, but we'll try it while we're here. So I'm gonna add another demo environment. So I'm gonna do, and we can connect, and yes, we can. So we've now connected which is our own demo environment, but you can take that as a representation of any of your on-premises environment, right? And we're hopefully, yep, that works. I can go straight into our demo environment from here. So that's our public demo, right? And again, you can consider this as a good representation of any of your on-premises environments that you would want to connect, right? And it's still syncing, so unfortunately I can't see it here yet. But again, if I would want to look at what that looks like from an overview, I can do that here, and I can show you briefly what that would look like for anyone who hasn't seen the enterprise console. This is the kind of overview that you would get, and of course, in this particular case, we've got multiple different systems here. Some of these are monitored versus the local analyzer, and then others are monitored through external analyzers that we've connected. And again, same principle here. You'd be able to then use, in this particular case, then the SaaS offering as your main console, basically, and you'd be able to add your on-premises analyzer deployments as the additional analyzers that you would then use to monitor any of the environments that are outside, right? So it is able to, and you're able to extend basically your environment that way and still use the SaaS offering then basically as your main port of call, right? So that's two ways of basically covering multiple different types of deployments or multiple different regions or different groups in Runecast, right? And that applies to the SaaS offering as well. In terms of overall look and feel or any sort of changes, there is absolutely no difference between what you do in SaaS versus what you do on premises. There's some minor functionalities that are currently not available in the SaaS offering. For example, the log analysis for VMware, of course, because it relies on the on-premises VMware connection, and of course, as I've mentioned earlier, that's currently not a possibility to do from the SaaS offering. So this is something that's currently not available through the SaaS offering. But again, if you have a larger on-premises VMware estate that you would want to monitor, then of course you can do that by adding an additional Runecast deployment into your on-prem and connect it via the enterprise console to the SaaS offering. So that's definitely still an option.
And Markus,
yes,
as we can see on the screen in the top right-hand corner, I mean, that was a great explanation of Runecast SaaS, and thank you very much for that. But we've also brought in with Runecast SaaS, and to be clear with everyone, you only get this option at the moment in Runecast SaaS. As we can see in the latest Runecast updates, we have the Agentless Vulnerability Scanning for AWS. So this is for monitoring Linux EC2 instances at the moment. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit for us?
Absolutely. And for that, I'll actually go into the demo environment, which is a little bit easier to talk through. You've probably seen earlier when I went through the initial installation wizard that there was now a new point or a new set of questions that pertain to the actual setup of the agentless scanning, right? And like Steve mentioned, currently this applies to AWS environments only through our SaaS offering. And in its very initial phase, it covers Linux-based EC2 instances for vulnerability assessment. Of course, as we go along, we will extend that functionality to include things like, compliance monitoring and configuration drift management, things like that we normally do with an agent present currently on premises or in the cloud. And right now, as our V1 or as our first version, what we cover is the pure vulnerability assessment of the EC2 instance. And if you go into the settings, you will see when we look at some of the operating systems or some of the AWS regions, right? So we have two different settings now for workload scanning, right? Basically, one is the traditional operating system connection settings, right? That will still exist, and we will continue to support the agent, and we will continue to support improving the agent and adding new functionality to that as well, because of course we do understand in certain circumstances an agent is more preferable than an agentless approach. But we also understand, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from customers as well, that in certain circumstances it's more preferable to not needing to deploy an agent and not needing to have to monitor and manage and update agent components and things like that across larger deployments. So we will have both going forward, and as time goes on, we will obviously improve the agentless scanning capabilities to be on par with what we do for the agent-based monitoring. But yeah, you now have two places where you can see vulnerability assessment or workload scanning, basically. One being the traditional operating system connection settings, right? That's where your agent-based configurations live. And then within AWS, you will have an additional section here that, based on our initial setup earlier on, where you would then see your agentless configurations, right? So in this particular case, and of course, this is dummy data, right? So, you given that that's the demo environment, right? So you got to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, because it shows here that it's not available for scanning, but that's just because it's dummy data. But similar to what we looked at earlier, this is where you would then be able to go in and add regions, update an existing CloudFormation stack, and choose where you would want to deploy, right? And after that, it requires some additional permissions, of course. And after that, basically, this is your end of the deployment done, right? Once these settings are made, once the CloudFormation template has either been created in the initial setup or updated, if you need to add workloads for scanning, that's it, right? After that, once you analyze the environment, your findings will show up among the rest of your findings, just as agent-based ones as well. So if let's go into AWS here, and again, this is the demo environment. It's always a little bit on the slower side. So we're in the AWS environment. So let's have a look at the vulnerabilities, and we should be able to find some. Let's see, Linux here. We've got one. Analysis findings. So when you go into the analysis findings, then you'll be able to see where this one came from. So this particular finding it's a package finding for a CVE, right? We get the data here, but it shows you here in this particular case, this was done via agentless scanning, right? So in terms of the issue description, all of the things that you would be used to seeing in terms of any sort of vulnerability scanning, any sort of CVE data that you're used to be seeing within Runecast still looks the exact same. The difference here is just when you go into the findings and you actually have a look at that, you'll be able to tell whether this was an agent-based finding or an agentless finding, right? But that obviously only is really important in scenarios where you would potentially use both setups in maybe different sets of workloads, right? So you might have one set of workloads that you would deploy the agent in, and maybe one set of workloads that you would prefer to do agentless. Then this distinction becomes important. But other than that, it's not really important, in the sense that as long as the data that you get in terms of the CVE data, the finding in terms of where it is, what workload it is, and what package it is, all of this is the same. So where it came from becomes kind of secondary in this particular case, right? Like I said, it only really is important if you do run both, right? Where you run agent-based vulnerability assessment maybe in one part of your environment, and agentless vulnerability assessment in other parts of the environment. But like I said, from a look and feel perspective, it provides the same data, it's the same setup. And with the added benefit, of course, that in this particular case, if you do go for the agentless vulnerability assessment, it obviously allows you to deploy this quite quickly and without the need for continuous maintenance, right? So you can probably see a little bit of a common theme among those two topics, right? So in both cases, both for the actual deployment as well as for the vulnerability assessment, in the the agentless scanning, the main driver was to help customers remove and reduce some of the maintenance overhead, right? Of every piece of software requires you to spend time and resources on, right? The same applies for Runecast. We've always tried to keep this, and I think very successfully, keep this to a minimum. But at the end of the day, it still requires you to deploy an OVA. It still requires resources, and agents still require deployment, updating, and maintenance. And both of these efforts, the SaaS deployment as well as the agentless scanning for SaaS, are both directly related to providing customers an additional way of reducing that overhead that's required to get value out of Runecast, right? So if you deploy SaaS, it's no longer your infrastructure. You really only have to worry about logging in and running it. You don't have to worry about the scalability. You don't have to worry about the actual size of the instance, all of the things that come with running Runecast, for example. You don't have to worry about that anymore. And by using the Agentless Vulnerability Assessment and obviously later on additional functionality, same thing. You don't have to worry about the upkeep of the agent components, the installation, making sure it's baked into the initial golden image when you deploy your operating systems and things like that. You just basically have to make sure that there is a workload in that region that is allowed to touch the EC2 instances and do the vulnerability assessment. So again, it just overall is designed to reduce the overall effort required. And I know we're getting close on time, so I do want to leave a little bit of time for questions if there are any.
I was waiting for a nice moment to jump in there, but we have a raised hand. But we do have a question from Andre. Does agentless vulnerability scanning for AWS require operating system licenses? So billable asset is for Windows and Linux agents, yes.
Yes, it does require billable assets.
So all of the licensing is exactly the same.
Correct.
Yeah, we haven't changed anything there. Okay, so being very wary of time, and thank you very much everyone for staying with us, because I do realize we're 9 minutes over. Just to kind of summarize and close on this and bring us back to ground zero. It's easy to forget the start of the messaging, and the messaging originally was, why Runecast SaaS? So Markus has given us an amazing insight into what we can do with Runecast SaaS, how we can connect it globally. But remember, no matter whether you're a customer or a partner, the end user here can either use it if you've got a small to medium size enterprise, which, sorry, let me share my video. Yeah, so if you've got a small to medium size enterprise, which doesn't have much capacity to install something else, obviously SaaS is a great option. If you're a global enterprise and you need to connect everything globally, obviously that makes things a great option. It makes SaaS a great option as well. So there are many, many areas here that we can use SaaS for. Obviously, the agentless monitoring of Linux is a big help. Trying to keep on top of updates for agents, deploying the agents, it's a lot of work. Also, if you think about every instance of software that you have in your environment, that's another attack vector. So by removing the agents, you're removing attack vectors as well. On the point of agentless and moving towards it, Markus, are we allowed to tease about what's coming up? Or, I have just teased about what's coming up, but are we allowed to say anything, or should we just leave people hanging there?
I'm gonna have to say I'm gonna have to be very, very carefully with teasing, but let's just say there's a couple of things I guess I would say to the audience. Watch this space over the next 2 to 3 weeks. There will be some announcements in terms of agentless capabilities that are pretty revolutionary when it comes to the industry. And that's about as far as I want to lean into that direction, but most definitely very, very interesting. And in particular, when it comes to some of the on-premises deployments. And I'm giving away pretty much everything, so everyone in the audience can connect the dots there. But watch this space. You'll see more about this over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Of course, in time for VMware Explore, but it's really, really exciting. There's some really exciting things coming up, and looking forward to kind of get some of the feedback from people in the audience as well to some of the things that we're about to release.
No, I can definitely vouch for that. I've spent the last couple of weeks writing the documentation on it, and it's very exciting stuff coming up. So, on that point, while we're promoting 6.6, as Markus said, we've got something very exciting coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So that will be version 6.7, which will bring, again, even more insights into your environments. Obviously, I think, as customers and partners, you've seen how Runecast never stops evolving. We're always pushing forwards at an incredible pace. It's one of the reasons I love working for this company. It's exciting the way that Runecast moves forward. So, as always, if you have any questions after the webinar, please reach out to us. We're more than happy to jump on a call with you or answer emails if you prefer. We would like to thank you very much for attending this webinar. We look forward to seeing you at the next release webinar. I would like to say thank you very much to Markus for joining me today and for answering all of our questions about Runecast SaaS and the agentless capabilities. And have a great rest of your day and happy Runecasting.